There was a lake in my old neighborhood with old houses surrounding it. As a kid, the house of Mrs. Maggie was my favorite one. She was, as best as I can remember, around 80 years old, but despite that, she was one of the friendliest people I had ever met. She had a head of lucette, white curls, and always wore light dresses with floral patterns. She would talk to me and Josh from her back porch when we were swimming in the lake, and she would always invite us in for snacks. She said that she was lonely because her husband Tom was always away on business, but Josh and I would always decline her invitation to come inside, because as nice as she was, there was still something a little odd about her. Often when we swam away, she would tell us that we were welcome any time, but more often than not, she wouldn't call us by our names. She would call us Chris and John. Sometimes we would still hear her yelling that when we were walking back to my house. Mrs. Maggie, like many of the other older homeowners, had a sprinkler system that was on a timer, though at some point over the years her timer must have broken or something, because the sprinklers would come on at various points during the day and night all year. While it never got cold enough to snow too much, several times each winter I would go outside in the morning to see Mrs. Maggie's yard transformed into this surreal Arctic paradise by the frozen water. Every other yard stood sterile and dry from the cold, but right there in the middle, the bleak reminder of winter's cruelty, was an oasis of beautiful ice hanging like stalactites from the branches of the trees and the leaves in the bushes. As the sun rose, it reflected off of all the ice and splintered into this rainbow that could only be viewed for a few seconds before it blinded you. Even as a kid, it struck me how beautiful it was, and often Josh and I would go over there to walk on the iced grass and have sword fights with the icicles. I once asked my mom why she never bothered to get the sprinkler system fixed. My mom seemed to search for an explanation before she told me the answer.
Well, sweetie, Miss Maggie gets sick a lot, and sometimes she gets really sick. She gets confused. That's why she messes up your and Josh's names sometimes. She doesn't mean to, but sometimes she can't remember. She lives in a big house all by herself, so it's okay if you talk to her when you swim in the lake. But when she invites you, you should keep saying no. Be polite and her feelings won't get hurt.
But she'll be less lonely when her husband comes home, though, right? How long will he be away on business? It seems like he's always away. My mom seemed to struggle, and I could see that she had become upset. Finally, she answered me.
Honey, Tom's not coming home. Tom's in heaven. He died years and years ago. But Miss Maggie doesn't remember. She gets confused and forgets, but Tom's never coming home. If someone moved back in with her, she might think it was Tom, but he's gone, sweetie.
I couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 when she told me that, and I didn't really understand it. But still, I felt really sad for Mrs. Maggie. Now I know that Mrs. Maggie had Alzheimer's. She and her husband Tom had 2 sons, Chris and John. The 2 had worked out payment plans with the utility companies and paid for Mrs. Maggie's water and electricity, but they would never visit her. I never knew why they became estranged. Maybe they had a fight, or it was illness, maybe they just lived too far away, but for whatever reason, they never came around. I didn't even know what they looked like, but there were times when Mrs. Maggie must have thought that Josh and I looked like they did when they were children. Or maybe she saw what some part of her mind wanted her to see, ignoring the images given to her and replacing them with what she wanted so desperately. I realize only now how lonely she must have been. During the summer after kindergarten, before the balloon project, Josh and I had taken to exploring the woods near my house, as well as the tributary of the lake. We knew that the woods between our houses were connected, and we thought that it would be really cool if the lake near my house was somehow connected to the creek around his. So we resolved to find out. We were going to make maps. The plan was to make 2 separate maps and then combine them. We would make one map exploring the area around the creek near his house, and make another following the outflow from my lake. Originally, we were going to make just one, but we realized that it wasn't really going to work, since I drew the map of my area so big that the route from his house wouldn't have been to scale at all. We each kept our part of the map at our houses, and we would add to each of them when we stayed the night with each other. For the first couple of weeks, it went pretty well. We would walk through the woods along the water and pause every couple of minutes to add to the map, and it seemed like the 2 maps would come together any day. It's not like we actually had the equipment needed for the job. We didn't even have a compass, but we tried to make do anyway. We were terrible cartographers, but eventually other things came up that stopped us from being able to complete the map. Eventually, the woods became too thick near the water coming from the lake, and we weren't really able to proceed further safely. It was around that point that we started to lose interest in the project for a bit, and we reduced our exploration significantly when we started selling snow cones. After I showed my mom all the pictures I had taken home from school and she took away the snow cone machine, our interest in the maps revitalized. We had to come up with another plan. Although I didn't understand why, my mom had decided to keep a much closer eye on me from that point onward. I had restrictions on what I could do, where I could go, and I had to check in frequently with her if I went outside to play with Josh. That meant that we couldn't stay in the woods for hours and continue to look for a new path like we used to. And even if we could, we were still essentially stuck at that one point in the woods. We thought we could just swim when we got to that place, but that wouldn't really work since the map would get wet. We tried going faster when we were coming from Josh's house, but we ran into the same problem there too. But then we had an idea. We could build a raft. Due to the construction in the neighborhood, there was a large amount of scrap building material that the company would set in the ditch to keep it out of the road and off-site since they weren't really using it for building. Since we basically had all the material we could need, we had originally conceived of this formidable ship complete with a mast and anchor, but this quickly diminished into something more manageable. We set aside the wood altogether and took several large pieces of styrofoam that were back to the foam board and tied them together with rope and kite strings. We launched the vessel a little downwater from Mrs. Maggie's house and waved a farewell to her as she motioned us to come back inside, but there was no stopping us at that point. The raft actually worked pretty well, and while we both acted like we knew the functionality of the raft was a given, I know at least I was a little surprised. We each had a fairly long tree branch to use as a paddle, but we found it easier to just push against the land under the water than actually use them as intended. When the water became too deep, we'd just lie on our stomachs and use our hands to paddle the water, which still worked, albeit a lot less well. The first time we had to resort to that method of propulsion, I remember thinking that from a bird's eye view, it would have looked like this really fat man with tiny arms was out for a swim. It actually took us several trips to get to that one part of the woods we were stuck in. We ended up sailing the raft a little bit, docking it, and then coming back for it later. This continued well into the first grade. Josh and I were assigned to different groups that year, so we didn't really see each other much during the school day. However, our parents were more than willing to let us hang out all weekend each week. What's more, both of Josh's parents worked, his dad in a construction job and his mother on call, so that meant that Josh would stay at my house almost every Saturday. We should have been making great progress, but when we actually made it to the impasse and had the opportunity to explore past it, we could never actually find a place to dock the raft. The woods were too thick, and the water had eroded the land to the point where there was about a 2-foot rise up of earth over the tributary, which exposed the twisting, damp roots of the trees above. We'd have to turn back every time and leave the raft at the same thick of trees that prompted us to build it in the first place. Even worse, when winter arrived, we couldn't really justify leaving the house in our swimsuits. We weren't really going anywhere. We always had to come home before we could actually gain any ground. It was on one of those Saturdays, around 7 p.m., when Josh and I were playing and heard Samantha, one of my mom's coworkers, knock on our door. My mother said that some problem had come up at work and that she had to leave her around 2 hours to fix it. Her car was being repaired, so she'd have to ride with Samantha. She said that under no circumstances were we to leave the house or open the door for anybody, and she was in the middle of explaining that she would call every hour when she got there to check in on us, but she ended that statement early when she remembered that her phone had been turned off for delinquent payments. That was why Samantha had just sort of come unannounced. She looked me dead in the eye when she was closing the door and told me to stay put. Finally, Josh and I had found our chance. As soon as Mom's car faded from view, the two of us ran to my room. I dumped my backpack out while Josh grabbed the map.
Hey, do you have a flashlight?
No, but we'll be back way before dark.
Well, I was thinking just in case. We should have one.
My mom has one, but I don't know where she keeps it. Wait. I ran to my closet and pulled a box down from the top shelf.
You have a flashlight in there?
Not exactly. I opened the box and revealed 3 Roman candles that I had taken from the pile of fireworks that my mother had gotten for the 4th of July the last summer, along with a lighter that I had managed to take from her some months before. This would ensure that we were at least going to have some light if we needed it. This was before that incident where I had been left alone in the woods at night, so the motivation for finding a light source wasn't fear, it was just practicality. We threw it all in the backpack and bolted out the back door, making sure to close it so that boxes wouldn't get out again. We had an hour and 15 minutes.